Okay, we're all good to go. Yeah, thanks everyone for giving up your Thursday evening. So what's on the plan today is to go through the report, which just came out a week and a bit ago, and then we'll go through sort of the national picture first, before going into a few of the focus catchments, and then sort of trying to reconfigure where we are. I know there's been a lot of talk around the Dirty Business documentary, which I'm sure a lot of you have seen, and been quite shocked by. But I think that's our sort of post-office moment, so it's worth sort of having a think of where we're going from here. And then Ian Diver, from Test and Itchen Association, as well as a number of other hats, is going to talk about the chalk streams section. This was also involving Adam from For Love of Water. We couldn't quite get the diaries to match up, so it's just Ian doing that one. But yeah, there was obviously stuff about the Avon, Hampshire as well, and then we'll have some time for questions. I might pause before we turn over to chalk stream and do some questions there, and then let Ian do, rather than loading them all up until right at the end. And Isla, who's the much more intelligent person who actually did all the hard graph with the data analysis for the report, has joined us as well. So if you've got any more technical questions or anything for Isla, then she's here as well. Okay, so yeah, first of all, really is thank you to everyone for what is a pretty remarkable sampling effort. The network is now the single biggest regular citizen science project in UK rivers. You've got the Earthwatch one, which I think technically has more samples, but because they're all done on one day a year, I'm saying regularly sampled, which is a pretty amazing effort, really. You'll see 12,250 was the number cited in the report. I mean, even since then, it's gone up to 12,700. If you add it up across sort of all of the different measurements, so phosphate, ammonia, nitrate, etc., then it's actually 56,602 measurements. So it's a pretty mega spreadsheet, which Isla was unfortunate enough to receive and have to go through and do the detailed analysis for. And that's, this has come about in 4 years, which is pretty remarkable, really. And obviously, it's all of you driving it forward and getting out there, come rain or shine, to do the monitoring. So yeah, it's been 800 volunteers have made it possible. I think we've got about 500 who are sort of active at the moment, but that's 800 since starting have made that possible. Obviously, there's a lot of time going on away from the riverbank, but yeah, we reckon it's about 167 days and nights non-stop sampling, which is just a show of the immense effort that's led us to be here. Chris, can I ask you just to mute yourself if that's possible? I can hear some dishes maybe getting cleaned. So yeah, moving on to the first bit. So in terms of phosphate, what Isla did was filter them by those with 8 or more samples in each year, because obviously the benchmarks that we're comparing to in WFD are annual averages, so that's why they're averaged out over the year. You'll see that sort of steadily grown, the number of sites which have been regularly monitored like that. So 107, 244, 245. It's quite a mixed pattern, really, on the surface, going from about 44% to 39%, and then back up again to 41%, breaching that limit. Now, when you actually look on the next slide at the graph, there's a pretty obvious seasonal pattern that's been going on with phosphate. So yeah, falling in the winter months and then rising again in the warmer months. So there's two kind of interpretations of this. One is that the effective dilution is much more significant than the inputs. Obviously, I know in around the Avon, you guys have got a setup where you can get a regular email whenever there's been a spill. Obviously, you'll be getting a lot more emails this time of year than in the summer. So, and the same from runoff from agriculture is pretty extreme at this time of year. But obviously, there's been a lot more water in the river, so there's a lot of dilution. The other thing which might be going on is the HANA device potentially underreporting in low water temperatures. So this is one that Casco have been doing some work on. And I know some colleagues at University of Bristol also. And the reason for that being is they're accurate, plus or minus 0.04 parts per million at 25 degrees. Now, obviously, even in the peak of summer, we're very rarely going to get water that warm in UK rivers. And then around about winter, when we're looking at near freezing temperatures, it's a hell of a lot colder than that optimal temperature. What it will do is consistently underreport when it's in cold temperatures, because what happens is that chemical reaction of the reagent dissolving is slowed really significantly. Now, there is something we can do to sort of work around this, which is when you're swilling it around to dissolve it, because it's quite a small volume of liquid, if you sort of hold it right in the palm of your hand rather than doing the usual sort of holding it like this, then it will warm it up a bit. And then it is a little bit of sort of a labor of love of taking the time to make sure it is all dissolved. It's basically the best guidance we can give to stopping that effect. And this is quite a common theme throughout, is I think that pattern is quite clear and won't all be down to this underreporting, but it is something we can work on going forward to try and mitigate that, and so we can just conclude with a bit more confidence what that seasonal variation is caused by. And then looking at the 3-year trend, this was probably the potentially the one or the main bit of good news over the whole report, which, as you can see, phosphate is trending downwards. This is in line with reductions we've seen over really since about the 60s or so, as we've started getting more investment in upgrades in sewer works, and where there weren't even any treatment going on in a lot of places, that's been happening. But having said, it's obviously varying year by year. It's hard to tell, what next year is going to look like, given it's gone down and then back up again. So we'll have to wait and see, keep getting data and seeing what we get. And as I said, obviously that baseline is really high. The government was meant to be on track for meeting a lot of these targets by 2027. If you're looking at that data and saying, well, this is just one of the indicators of good ecological status, and 40% are breaching it. When you add in, you've got a whole host of other things as well. It's a high baseline, but it is one bit of good news that has been trending downwards over the years. And then moving on to nitrate, this was in a classic campaigner hat sort of fashion. We've sort of led with that statistic that nitrate has been gone through the roof, really. So you see it's gone from 44 to 46 and up to 50% of all samples being at 5 parts per million or more. Obviously, that's not a legal limit, but it is still ecologically significant. And it's crazy, really. 50% of samples and it going in that way. We'll have to do a method audit at some point. Now we've just about got enough data with moving over to the new strips, so that when it comes to next year, when we've moved from the hack ones to the simplex or the waterworks one, if you want to call them that, we can see whether we've still got that pattern going on. But obviously, that's just a really alarming pattern, starting at a really high baseline of 44% and then continuing to get worse is not what we want to see. This is really probably the clearest graph for depicting that, where you can see, I think generally we can ignore that first few months of the first year, because the number of samples are so low at that point that they can really be easily skewed. And you can see that from how wide the 95% confidence intervals are, by those sort of vertical lines going out from it over that time period. But if you get rid of those, there's been no month since the start where nitrate has UK wide been on average above 5 parts per million. And you can see suddenly you go this last year and you've got 4 whole months and 1.5 month in July where that's happened. So that is really, again, really concerning, and obviously it's going to be, in theory anyway, largely down to a mix of, it's not just going to be sewage and that sort of stuff. It's also going to be agriculture. There was quite a lot of report of really early muck spreading on fields throughout the country, which potentially led to more runoff, especially in those sort of early spring summer months. And get stuff growing when it was so dry. So we think that might have been part of it. But again, there's more research to be done on that. And then moving to ammonia, because the threshold is set so crazy high by our own choosing, really, because we've not yet done that analysis of doing the site-specific analysis, mainly because we're not all on monitoring at the exact site. So you can see the ammonia standards actually vary between 0.3 and 0.6. So that 0.6 value is pretty high. So it's a pretty high bar to get over, hence it's such a low proportion, which is something we can look into maybe next year, and at some point at different points as well. For things like this, there's a lot more questions that we'd like to do. If we can get some more time to get some research done on them, you can see then again, it has still been steadily increasing, or quite rapidly, really. So yeah, 3.6, 3.9 up to 4.5, which is again not a good sign. And the main source of that will be the water industry. And again, obviously the reason we care about it so much is because when it breaks down, it does become directly toxic to fish. So this is really not what we want to be seeing. It doesn't vary quite so much as phosphate does over the different periods, but we have seen some spikes in the summer months, which is more concerning because obviously when we're in the warmer months, the rate of ammonia breaking down into ammonium, which is actually what's toxic to fish, is massively increased. So when you've got increased concentration and increased water temperature, then this is sort of a double negative effect for all our wildlife. So again, that'll be another thing to track going forward, and will probably be the clearest indicator we've got of water industry performance, perhaps even compared to other ones. Now we were about up to 2 in 5 groups now, as of the final year, monitoring ammonia, which is quite a big growth from at the beginning where it was sort of quite peripheral, and then now it's actually been growing quite a lot. So we have now got quite a robust data set to actually compare of, and you can see even going back to the first year, there's no ammonia at all until October, and then only really a few. We only really start hitting a decent number by sort of early in January in that first year. And conductivity has seen a pretty crazy spike. So when we're looking at getting rid of those first few months again, you can see it's a pretty consistent trend going up over the years, and this is monthly averages. But there is quite a big reason for caution on this event, which is made a bit clearer on here. And that's when we do look at this frequency diagram, you can see in the first year there's none of these extreme results. So up until what's that, about 2000, there's nothing there. And then going beyond that, you can see there's a big increase in these really extreme results. Now it's quite, whether these are actually ecologically possible can be questioned, really. I think the reason that's kept in is, I think what's most likely going on there is because we're measuring sort of essentially salts. What's going to happen is things are going to crystallize over the little metal probes, which I think might be responsible for this big increase. So again, along with the phosphate, sort of trying to be careful with making sure it's all dissolved, the advice here is to just take a look at your device and see if there's anything sort of crystallized on it, because you should be able to see it if there is, because that might be what's causing sort of consistently crazy high conductivity levels. But it's not just those which has dragged the average up. We've also seen a changing that distribution. So it starts off with that really strong positive skew and then dips quite a lot. So I think it's in the region of about 600 to 800. You've got a pretty big increase in the number there. So that's also, it might not just be the problems with the equipment. It might also be sort of those mid-ranging ones which are unlikely to be affected by the same sort of issues. So yeah, it's one which looks really concerning when you look at that, but might be something where we really need to take a bit more of a look at equipment, which is one, if you can have a look at them, see if you've got anything sort of crystallized, and then if you do and you can't get rid of it, then give us a shout and we can see if there's anything we can work towards to get a solution on that, so that going into next year we can conclude with a bit more confidence about it. I might pause there actually before we move on to focus catchments, and see if anyone's got any questions at this stage on the sort of nationwide data analysis.
Yeah, I've probably got a question on calibration. So we've all got these HANA testers. I mean, do they drift out of calibration over time? Is that potential issue too? And certainly with the EC and temperature checker, you can buy quite a cheap calibration solution to check your sensors working properly.
Yeah, so this is one thing at the moment which very soon, the reason I've not put out advice on it is because, well, in recent months is costs, because obviously they're about 30 quid a pop for they do need calibration. What I'm trying to do is figure out how cheap we can get a big discount on them, so that for a few months we can put a big discount on calibration sets, so that it's just a bit easier to stomach for people to get it done, and I'll sort that as soon as possible. They do sort of the advice is sort of every year, or if you start getting really crazy results. But obviously, yeah, that is something that we need to do, is get more on top of the calibration. Is either if it's coming to a year or 18 months and you haven't calibrated it, then they are in need of it. And if you start seeing just weird results that you wouldn't expect, because you know the stretch as well, then also it's worth a go as well. Ian?
Just one thought I have is good old EpiCollect is quite permissive as to what you can record. So I had one volunteer who insisted they'd recorded an EC of 50. And what I think they were actually doing was reading the temperature in Fahrenheit off of their meter and recording it as EC. So, I mean, we will get these outliers, as you say, and we can't sort of put some hard validation in, but I don't know is there a way of, saying, or when you enter a number to EpiCollect, is there a way of saying, well, are you really sure? Just to sort of encourage people to think, or to double check, or to even do a sample again?
There isn't a functionality for you can set prompts for, so if it's like a yes or no, you can set it to skip things and go on to something else. But in terms of getting an answer, so say if it was, you put in 12,000 on or 50,000 on electrical conductivity, it wouldn't prompt you say, is that right? But if it was that extreme, then it would be filtered out anyway of the data set, just because it's actually outside of the range of it. I think that's always sort of one of the natural things of citizen science is trying the sort of training at all the different levels, and more advice and conversations like this, and also whatever you can have locally to try and filter these out. I do take a look at the data when I put it in every month to see if there's anything weird going on. But yeah, that's, I think, just partly some of the nature of citizen science to a certain extent. I'd love it if EpiCollect had that, but I think also people might get a bit frustrated if every value you put in instead of you sure. But yeah, it's just for certain ones. Yeah. Chris?
Just put my mic on. Yeah, the probes on my conductivity tool. What am I looking for?
Just any, I mean, it's sort of salts that have sort of crystallized on them. Just any sort of debris.
Is there a good way to clean it?
So it's really hard to describe the sort of. I've got a weird little brush that comes with a coffee machine that I stick in mine. Any sort of bristly thing that you can get in, whether it's a sort of trip to B&Q or even a sort of a toothbrush is a bit too big. I've tried that before. You can't squeeze it in, but yeah, anything, and even a sort of fabric cloth, and then sort of get a pen and get it in there. You might be able to get some of it off that way.
Yeah, it's just that I've never ever touched them. I've just shook it clean and put it somewhere to dry near a radiator or whatever. But I will try to clean it with a brush. Yeah.
Yeah, it's great. I mean, it's really I would, unless you can see there's debris on it, I'd leave it be, because the main thing really is it sounds like you're doing all the right things in terms of maintenance. Like I think if it's not dry and it gets put away and then you've used it, if you're using it every month for a few years, then you're bound to get a bit. But it's that sort of, again, which was already mentioned earlier, is doing exactly what you said. Make sure it's dry before you put it away. Is probably the biggest thing in keeping them operating.
Thank you.
I found cotton earbuds are really useful.
Yeah. Okay.
That's a much less convoluted answer than my try and get a weird coffee machine brush and stick it in. Yeah. Anything else before we move on to the focus catchments?
I've got a question, if I could, Alex.
Yep.
Yeah, going back onto the EpiCollect one, I've got two actually. The EpiCollect one, it gives you the option to not upload it straight away. So would that be an opportunity for someone to check it before it's actually uploaded?
So it won't come through to anyone. So you mean when it's sort of you've saved it, but it's not been sent in that sort of intermediate
Correct.
stage? Yeah. So
yeah,
you could
obviously person obviously to check it, but just to make sure. That's what I tend to do. I always write it down in my book as well.
Yeah. So I mean, for yourselves, before you send it off, that would be one way to do. And then, of course, but until it's actually submitted to the live form, then it won't be on the database. So in terms of anyone else checking it, they won't be able to. But you can go back and edit them at a later date. If you don't have access to be able to go back and do that, then let me know, and then I can change whatever the role is you're assigned, and then you can go back and edit it if it sort of strikes you later that it's wrong.
Yeah, that's good. The other one was the simplex strips. Has there been any problems with trying to get hold of those? I know when I looked on the website a few weeks ago, they're out of stock. Yeah,
so this is one of my nightmares, which I'm off next week, but I'm probably gonna have to try and still, if they said about 5 weeks ago, we'll have them back in stock in 3 weeks, and that was across 2 suppliers. So we sort of hedged our bets across the 2 main suppliers of them, and we got about 100 on back order. They said 3 weeks ago. I chased them again today, and they won't give us a date. So it's kind of reaching the point where I'm really reluctant to move to a third different nitrate testing strip for obvious reasons. But yeah, as soon as they're there, we've got a load on back order. It's just, yeah, everyone's out of them.
Okay, we tend to try and share ours around if there's an issue, with a supply of them. But obviously that can only last for a certain amount of time anyway.
Yeah, no, it's one of those things that has been a bit of a pain, and hopefully they'll have them in stock as soon as possible, because it is dragging on now.
Okay, good one.
I can see. Were you waiting to ask a question as well, Martin, or no?
Yeah, I mean, just go back to the data analysis. I'm just conscious there's a huge difference between spring-fed and rain-fed rivers. And I wonder if that's, I don't know if we'll get later into, maybe that's, when you break the data out, there's a big difference, and maybe that would change some of the focus and some of the findings.
Yeah, that would be a really interesting one, actually.
I'm just thinking, because we see, because of the historic use of fertilizers on the chalk downlands, our nitrate levels in Hampshire are always very, very high compared to, let's say, other rivers which don't get fed with groundwater, and it must be kind of distorting the overall numbers a bit in where that works, especially as we're kind of a very high reporter.
Yeah, I think it can skew them quite. It's like you say. I mean, it's the same as maybe in the Avon Warwickshire catchment. To be fair, sort of like they're on this different level of it. Sort of you're looking at 89% failing phosphate, whereas according to WFD, where you are, it'll be only 4 or 5. So it's sort of that's the national picture. I think. Yeah, you can. I guess you can slice the cake in a number of different ways. We like to do more of that sort of analysis of whether it's, like you say, sort of chalk streams. And to be fair, Ian will come on to do that sort of chalk stream stuff later on. But it's whether, there's a lot of different things, whether it's comparing to EA data sets or finding some more exciting shapefile layers. I don't know if Isla, you wanted to come in at any point. I'm conscious that I'm talking about your data analysis and probably getting some details wrong.
Can you hear me? Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Yeah, we didn't necessarily look at that. I mean, like there were so many factors. I think Alex can attest to this that we discussed looking into, and I think due to the timing and everything, we obviously had to like pick specific ways we wanted to do the data analysis. So obviously at this time we more focused on these focused catchments, and I think maybe one of the main areas we did decide to look at were the chalk streams, and Alex and some of you that are on the call, we had a call together to understand the different methods of analysing some of these sites. But I think, as Alex pointed out, there are lots of different factors that could be considered in the future, like with future data analysis. So yeah, I think if there was more time available, then definitely I think someone could do a deeper dive into so many different, characteristics of the site, or just any other factors that are having an impact on the areas that you're all collecting samples from.
Yeah, and even rainfall in general will be a really interesting one. I think we're looking at different ways. The main thing, and I was having a chat with another Ian the other day about this, was getting masters students to do their sort of final theses on it. So whether it's sort of just analyze our data set against rainfall and stuff like that, because in terms of resources, getting someone with sort of Isla's advanced expertise, sadly we don't have any sort of the annual report is sort of budgeted for, so we can get Isla in to do the amazing work that she did, and then sort of throughout the year I'd love to have a little pot of money around to do some more fun research, but I think there's masters students are being explored at the moment for the sort of solution to answer these different sort of questions. Nigel.
I just wanted to make a comment about the difference between chalk streams and the rain-fed rivers. I'm survey the Eden up here in the northwest, and the phosphates, nitrates are always pretty low, and it's a nice green spot compared with all the rivers around in Hampshire, particularly the Avon, which I fished a lot up till about 5 years ago. What kind of interests me is that although chalk streams seem more polluted, at least as far as we measure them, they're actually full of fish. But the Eden is actually quite thinly populated with trout these days. And, certainly from my own observations, but, also from people who fished it for, decades, and they say how poor it is now compared with what it once was. So I just point out that pollution as measured by us is not necessarily having an impact on the fish populations. That might be affecting the fly populations more.
Yeah, I suppose with the chalk streams differences, maybe because they are naturally nutrient poor, is they're much more sensitive, whereas you might still get fish in somewhere, the sort of main river like the Avon, sort of coming in with still quite high nutrients. But I'll leave that to Ian to come on to in a little while on the because he's the expert. So the less I say about chalk streams and let Ian talk about, I think the better. So I'll park that for now before Ian presents that. If there's nothing else for now, then we'll go through some of the focus catchments. As I said, the fourth one is sort of a lumped together one for the chalk streams. For this section, I'm not going to go into a huge amount of detail on the sort of data analysis for each catchment, just because I think everyone might fall asleep if I go through the phosphate concentration on all the rivers and etc. and we're here until 10 p.m. Instead, focus on what we can all sort of learn from each other on the ground in terms of campaigning and actually using the data. Saying that, and a reminder as well. Yeah, sorry if again, like I said, it was about timing of how much resource we've got to do whilst Isla was contracted with us. Hence, we chose those focus catchments with the most intensive sampling. The resource online, the Water Quality Monitoring Network sampling map is still there if you haven't seen it already, which is interactive. And if you want to look at your own site or you want to look at your whole river or pick a few, then that's there to sort of be able to really quickly and without having to enter the massive spreadsheet, which, like we said, had 56,000 cells in it. That's one thing you can do if you want to find out more about data at a local level, or get in touch as well, and we can have a chat about it. Yeah, first one is about Avon Warwickshire, and if what I'm doing at the moment is talking about your group, I'm looking at you, Steve, then feel free to jump in at any point. So you can see there, like we said, starting year one, you had phosphate was sort of 90% with 80 samples, and then it has gone down. So it sort of mapped that sort of national picture, really, at least the one that the EA has for phosphate concentration. But you're starting at an absolutely mega starting point of 89%, and then it's still way above that national average, and that is a robust data set, because as you can see, the incredible sampling effort of going up to 421 samples in the third year in the catchment, which is a pretty mega effort. And then nitrates as well, similar story really, huge baseline, slight decline, and then ammonia, now there has been some monitoring, has sort of floated around that 4% mark, so it'll be interesting to see what that next year's ammonia results say for that, actually.
We've just Alex, regarding the ammonia, we've only just started to sample the ammonia every month now, so it'd be quite interesting to see what happens next year with the results and the data.
I mean, it's nice seeing it sort of nationwide, really. There's more ammonia kits going out, and like you say, you can then establish that trend, and that's where that online map will hopefully be quite useful, because you can isolate just ammonia and see when it started and where you've been monitoring it. But Steve and Co have been doing a hell of a lot of other monitoring. So if you've not been familiar with that, so the Surfers Against Sewage, their bathing waters campaign, has been doing, they offer weekly E. coli testing in sort of as part of the campaign to try and establish bathing water status. I guess now you have to hope it doesn't find the waters too polluted to be considered to be a bathing water with the government's latest reforms. But I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole now. And then also, I don't know if Steve, you wanted to come in on this, because I think this is a really interesting story, which actually, interestingly, I got contacted about, the media team got contacted by, which water company would it be? Severn Trent, I guess. Got in touch saying, where did you get your number for this? And then I think one of your team managed to find that number within about an hour, which I don't think they were expecting. But yeah, go on, Steve.
Yes, I mean, we are fortunate because one of the guys in our group has actually made sure that we get an email that comes through for every single one of the spills. And unfortunately, one day last year, we had so many emails come through almost immediately afterwards. We changed that to just getting a summary of the spills at the end of each day. But I quoted, I think over 130 were spills were in the catchment of the Warwickshire Avon in the one day, which was 14th of November last year. I know that's one thing that Severn Trent questioned, but then when I looked into it, went back through all the emails I'd saved, I actually got 280 on that day.
Yeah,
So it's much higher than what we initially thought, to be honest with you.
Yeah, that data was sent over, and I was there was no quick way to count it apart from sort of relying on AI to maybe get the wrong number. And I sort of started scrolling through, got to about 200 for one day, and was like, just emailed them back being like, yes, here's the numbers. There's a hell of a lot more. But yeah.
It's something that we're looking at now. What I'm proposing is we find out where all our outflows are within the local catchment area, because we've got quite a few. Well, as everybody has, quite a lot of house building and planning applications going at the moment, which is very concerning, obviously. So we are going to do work on that and try and pinpoint certain areas. If you look at the E. coli testing, etc., last year, we got the Surfers Against Sewage gave us the funding for doing a 6-month weekly testing on one site, but we then raised enough money to do 2 more sites over that 6 months. One site was at the very top of our stretch that we test, and the other one was at the bottom, and the other one was in the middle, really, on a somewhere where the Girling Angling report, very close to where they actually have their fishery, and that came out to really high. That one in the middle part of the stretch that we test. So there's some interesting research needs to be done on what could be causing the issues that we're having at that particular point on the Avon.
Yeah, and you've got the data in place to try and have that conversation as well.
Of course,
And I think, I mean, really, it's a similar message to sort of in the last report, really, which is sort of all of the key things, which I'll sort of come and summarize all what I think are the key lessons for all the different groups of how they've been using data. But I think pretty much, all yourself and all the different groups around the Avon have been doing all of these different things. So whether it's your community outreach, sort of hosting and attending events, and ending up on sort of, like I say, scrutiny committees, local council, meeting with your local member of parliament, meeting with the Environment Agency, collaborating with other organisations. So it's sort of that whole thing. And it's like I said at the beginning, that the 4,000 hours of volunteer time, that's just on the riverbank. When you've got this crazy amount of work going in, a way to get all this engagement, that's when the data becomes really meaningful, and that's what you guys have been doing. So that sort of hit all of the different aspects of what you can be doing.
Yeah, I think from my point of view, actually being involved with the Testing the Waters Consortium, I think is a real good thing for our group, because I think it focuses on what other groups are doing. That meeting that was down in Henley on Thames about a month or so ago, what I found was a really useful meeting to find out exactly what other groups are doing and what effort they actually put in and where to put the effort in.
Yeah, absolutely. For those, if anyone is interested in finding out more about that Testing the Waters Consortium, then either check it out online or send me an email. It's basically a group of citizen scientists, water companies who sometimes turn up, tech companies who've sort of been responsible for installing everything, all coming together and sort of doing campaigns and also just sharing knowledge. So yeah, let me know if you want to find out more about that. I'm going to try and accelerate a bit because I'm aware of time to leave Ian some. There's, which I think was quite interesting about how this table, which Andy said, and over from Girling Angling Society of match results over recent years, and then you've got the last 3 years, the fishing's been so poor at Flatbury that it's been transferred in both months. And Andy is one person who speaks really, I don't think he's on the call today, but really clearly about just the plight that anglers have been faced of, him saying he retired hoping to go fishing, and then by the time he's retired there's no fish left, really, because the pollution is just so bad. You've got such a concentration of sewage, especially. But yeah, that was pretty harrowing. An interesting table. And moving on to the Medway. Again, there's a table there if you're interested in sort of the data side of things, where actually, again, it sort of followed that national picture really quite closely of slightly increasing nitrate, falling phosphate, and then ammonia is a bit of a different pattern. But I'm not sure how many samples were actually done there. So the campaign that they've been up to this year, which I know they're doing on the Avon as well, is that incident reporting. So they've had 3 major pollution incidents in one stretch due to a burst main, which actually did lead to a fish kill. Now, because they've got a established relationship with Southern Water and the Environment Agency, that was pretty quickly resolved. So the damage could have been a lot worse if it weren't for volunteers on the ground, not only being there, but also having that prior established relationship. So you're not sort of worrying about where who do I speak to. Yeah, and also they're having conversations about actually replacing that pipe. And again, there's a common theme around this of getting recognised as a stakeholder. So they've joined the catchment partnership. I think these are going to become potentially more important over the next few years because they have just got a doubling of funding. Still isn't a huge amount per catchment, but they have got an uplift in funding. So catchment partnerships are definitely worth speaking to. And yeah, in part due to the sort of work that they've been doing in measurements, they've been demonstrating around CSOs that Southern Water have actually employed new staff for mapping and logging all the CSOs. So yeah, change is actually being forced within water companies as well, which is obviously really good progress. And then there's these other aspects of, I'm aware we've spoken for 47 minutes on water quality. Obviously there's other indicators than ammonia and phosphate and all these sort of things, and on the Medway they've been getting up to that as well with riverfly, and actually a few volunteers trained to extended riverfly, which is a really interesting one to get done, because you're seeing sort of it's not just that angling sort of qualitative data of we've seen fish decline, we've seen water quality decline in the data, but you're also seeing this is what's happened to insect populations, and also doing that restoration. And on that subject, just a quick reminder, if Ed's still with us, a reminder of the sort of partnership there with the Wild Trout Trust. If Ed's disappeared to make his tea, if he's still there. If not, I'll come back to him.
I'm still here. I'm listening.
Still there?
It's very interesting. Yeah.
Sorry,
Absolutely.
I can't see everyone's faces. There you go. Sorry, go on, Ed.
That's fine. Yeah, so basically Wild Trout Trust is all over the country. So if you've got anything particularly a particular passion for sort of getting your waders on, getting in and getting some physical habitat in, it was interesting to hear about the decline in trout up north. So if it's not water quality, you've got to think what else might be going on there. So it might be limitations on physical habitat. So you guys are doing a great job kind of looking at the water quality. Once that's good, the fish has still got to have that physical habitat there. So it's kind of like the complementary action that Wild Trout Trust do. So a couple of my colleagues, David Oakley, he's kind of in the southeast. So if some of you guys are in the Medway and keen to get involved, then we can share his email. You can get in contact with David.
Yeah, great. I'll keep sending out links to that, because I think, having been on one of the sort of walks with Ed along the river, and seeing the sort of plans they put together, it's really detailed and can actually, like I say, I think it makes the whole thing slightly less depressing of just reporting bad water quality results, of actually be able to get in and do something to improve the habitat as well. Thanks, Ed. That's great. And then final focus catchment. Got on the Swale, Nid and Upper Ouse. Nice mouthful, which I decided not to put into an acronym because it didn't make any sense. So yeah, the Erlen, Dale and Dales rivers have been working. You can see there's a lot of different groups, which I think is quite common. We've got all these different campaign groups working together. And like it says there, I think the in-person events are really important. You've got 70 residents and anglers concerned about the river coming to a public meeting, and that's actually where they've got the real movement going. And then again, like I know a lot of groups are, so the Surface Against Sewage Bathing Waters campaign, by all means, if you want to get involved, then that is a really good scheme for getting a different kind of data that we obviously aren't collecting here. And again, meeting with the Environment Agency, county councillors, MPs, and getting all of that good work done. And then as well, invasive species management and that sort of and restocking all these things. So actually getting into the river to not only monitor it, but actually make the improvements. And also sharing with the local community. It's another thing which I know they've been doing on the Swale and also in other places. I know that's working because I think the Swale is one where I've had a good few people get in touch in recent weeks, sort of interested in joining, having spoken to some other citizen scientists in the catchment. I've got this. I always say when you put something into AI, into ChatGPT, and say make me a figure, it either comes out looking horrific or actually quite nice. And I thought this one was all right for sort of a summary of really all the sort of non data stuff that are ways you can actually put data to use, which is whether it's getting, there's different things we can monitor beyond the yellow kits, engaging with your local councils and MPs, local events, engaging with the Environment Agency, which I thought was quite funny that GPT decided to put a massive dollar sign on the Environment Agency. And then you've got data reporting, and then speaking to water companies, catchment partnerships, and then, which is really important as well, speaking to other local groups. It's been really nice recently when people have joined to be able to point them in the direction of other groups that are doing it, so that sort of down the line you don't come 2 years down the line and say, crap, we've been monitoring 20 meters away for each other for 2 years. So that collaboration is really important as well. But that's just sort of a summary of how people have been working together, which I think that's where this local campaigning has been actually delivering results, because it's both a national and a local campaign in the Water Quality Monitoring Network. And then I think this is my final slide really before we pass over to Ian. Which obviously, has everyone seen the Dirty Business documentary? Yeah, I know if docudrama. I know a few people who've said I watched the first 10-15 minutes, got too pissed off and turned it off, because it is quite aggravating. But yeah, it was pretty moving stuff really, but it has pushed water really up the agenda, which isn't going to last forever. So I think it's kind of worth stopping there to think, one, of actually the role that citizen science has played in Dirty Business actually becoming a thing, and it, the whole country sort of giving a toss about water. You look back to the manifestos in 2024, every single party had at least pledges. What they've done with those pledges with the Labour government, well, not going to rabbit hole here, but they at least were recognised. You looked at the manifestos before, there's no mention whatsoever, which is a pretty radical change. I don't think that would have happened without citizen science, actually, because obviously the Environment Agency has clearly not been doing their job, if you've seen that documentary. And actually, the Dirty Business, so the work of Ash and Pete at Witness Against Sewage Pollution, this wouldn't have been possible at all without Fish Legal's work back in 2015, which we've been chatting about, which is back in 2015. I know it's going back a while ago. There was water companies weren't listed as public bodies. So Fish Legal put in a request for information of water pollution data. They were rejected by the water company, rejected. That was upheld by the Information Commissioner. And so, because they said they're not a public body, they're not subject to the environmental information regulations. That was then, Fish Legal then took them to court and actually won this in, I want to say Court of Appeal, in some sort of court, which meant that water companies since 2015 have actually been listed as public bodies, which means they're subject to environmental information regulations, which is why WASP could start in 2017 and start getting all this massive amounts of data, and other groups across the country and all that sort of stuff. So I thought I'd chuck that bit of history in, of sort of another thing. And obviously we're all part of that same movement coming from citizen science. I think I feel like I say this in every webinar from a sort of campaign stance. I think, again, there is a risk of this is a sort of peak of interest I think we're probably ever going to get, and there is a lot of work to be done to keep interest going, whether it's novel research, seeing, I don't know, maybe given E. coli seems to be getting more attention at the moment, joining up with surface against sewage, getting more data through the water quality monitoring network, and then we can keep the momentum up. We have been pushing at the national scale, trying to get the government to give some recognition to water. They are going to have to make massive changes soon, because after 2027, the WFD won't apply. So they will need to have a think of what apex targets they're going to set. We're expecting actually potentially the transition plan towards the new water sector to come tomorrow. So keep an eye out for that. At the moment, they've completely ignored citizen science in the white paper and all their responses, which is one thing we're really keen for them to make the most of. I say at the moment, the biggest opportunity for sort of campaigning wise on the national scale is there are a lot of backbench MPs who don't mind making a noise at the moment, given everything else going on at the government. So that's one thing, a button that's been pressed by ourselves and a lot of other groups to try and get some movement going. But yeah, the reason the Angling Trust on a national scale can do it is really down to the Water Quality Monitoring Network, because it's the clearest embodiment of the fact that anglers are not just people out there catching fish. They're going out there and actually restoring rivers, monitoring them, getting data, and actually being the real steward. So that's how we're able to do it. And like we said, you've got all of those different ways that all of these things are happening at the local level as well. So it's if we're in meeting with the Environment Agency throughout the whole organisation and moving on to the new one, and that's how we're going to get these changes going forward. Yeah, there's a little reflection where we're going, and then finally just back up to yeah, thank you, because it's been a pretty immense effort to everyone. Thank you to Isla for doing all that data analysis. I remember the first conversation we had about it, look of Christ, when the 50,000 odd spreadsheet dropped in the slightly messy form that it's in. So having done all that hard work, and thanks to everyone for all of the thousands of hours that have been given up volunteering. Any questions before we pass on to talk about chalk streams in some more depth? No? Okay. I'm taking that. Water crisis solved now. No questions. We're all sorted. Awesome. Just going to stop sharing, and then so Ian can.
Okay, let me see if I can share my screen. Can everyone see that?
Yep.
Yep.
Right. Just bear with me a moment. I'll try and do the slide mode. Better. Yeah, hi. I'm Ian, Ian Diver, and I'm from. Well, I'm actually wearing several hats tonight. I'm from the Upper Itchen Restoration Community Interest Company. We are situated on the headwaters of the River Itchen here in Hampshire, which of course is one of our iconic English chalk streams. I'm also, as we'll say in a minute, we've recently produced a report which actually covers 3 rivers, the Test, the Itchen and the Meon, and we worked with the Test and Itchen Association, which is one of the, among other things, helps us to fund our yellow boxes. Just before we go any further, let's say thanks to Alex and Isla for putting together the Angling Trust report, which I thought was really good this year. And I know, having personally downloaded large amounts of data from EpiCollect and trying to make some sense of it. I know I know how many brain cells that destroys, and I think it's that's a challenge for us all, isn't it? Because it's we're collecting all this data, and we actually need to do something with it. Try and present it in a way that enables change to happen. So that's us. We're on beautiful TalkStream. We're a not-for-profit organisation. We've now got 80 volunteers, and we do lots of citizen science. It is our thing. So we do Riverfly that we've touched on today. We also we've just been surveying for trout reds in the last few months, of which we have seen an encouraging amount this year. We also try and keep on top of the invasive plant species. A few months ago, I was talking about our microplastics investigation that we've done with the University of Brighton. And of course, we have our yellow boxes, and we're now into our third year of data. And all of our material is on our website. You can and you can access it, and you're welcome to download it and use it in your own work. And TalkStreams, of course, are quite unique. To try and answer Nigel's question, that we have pollution in our chalk streams, but we still got a lot of fish. It's a difficult one to explain to people sometimes, but I think a chalk stream it's been compared to the Amazon rainforest in terms of the diversity, in terms of the abundance. People who've been here for longer than I have will tell you that there's been dramatic declines. It's a shadow of what it was. I think the bottom line for me is, there are a lot of trout. There's still food for them to eat. Of course, there's a healthy population of predators, otters, for example, which is another good sign. On the other hand, on our rivers, we have a genetically distinct population of salmon, but the salmon runs now are measured in a few hundred fish. So the Atlantic salmon is almost gone from our rivers. That's due to a number of things, so physical barriers, sewage pollution at the bottom end of the river, and possibly things that happen at sea during that phase of the salmon's life cycle as well. We do still have some beautiful, some fantastic rivers, but they're not what they once were. I'm also beginning to hear some worries about the grayling population too. That's the R in our name restoration, to try and find a way to get back to what our chalk streams once were, and what maybe they could be again. We've also touched on algal blooms tonight, haven't we? Here are some pictures. That's my colleague Howard, who is standing in the main itchin. Of course, last summer we had a drought, as I think a number of you did elsewhere in the country. Hot weather, low flow. Of course, the water companies are still taking water out of our rivers for the public supply. So we get green slime, and there you can see Howard with a great big ball of Cladophora, filamentous algae, blanket weed, in plain English, almost like a ball of twine. And when that blooms in those drought conditions, it smothers the weed, the ranunculus, which is the keystone species for everything else that lives in the river. So in our catchment, Test, Ditch and Meon, we have about 50 places where we're regularly testing. And we kind of feel that now we're into our third year, we've kind of got enough data to actually do something with, actually try and draw some conclusions. So let me share a few of the things that looking at this data has made us think, and the questions it's made us ask. We do have our own report. It's kind of summarised in the main Angling Trust report, but if you're interested, you're welcome to go to that URL and download it. And let's start with talking about nitrate. So Alex touched on nitrate earlier. We can read that. So the main graphic on this screen, this is Environment Agency data. So this is the official Environment Agency measurements of nitrate on our 3 rivers, and it's covering the period 1978 to 2024. And you can see on the heat map then, it starts off kind of back in the 70s, broadly green. And by the time we get to 2024, almost everywhere they sample, they've classified as red on their heat map. Obviously, this is a much longer time period than we've had WQMN for. But it kind of supports this view that the nitrate problem is getting worse. We also had some interesting conversations last year with Portsmouth Water, which is one of the water companies that abstracts water from our river for drinking. That's their graph there at the top right. And you can see there from about 1991, they were finding when they take raw water from the river, it's a bit less than 25 parts per million nitrate. And by the time they get to last year, it's kind of it's sort of over 35, heading for 40. But of course, that red dotted line there, that's the 50 parts per million drinking water standard, which is supposed to be for human health. And if your nitrate strips are measuring nitrate as nitrogen, that's about 11.4. So that's sort of 10 or more on your strips. And what Portsmouth Water are telling us is that they really need at least a 10% reduction in some places in what farmers are applying to arable fields if they're going to continue to have water that meets the drinking water standards. And we hear that the water companies are having to take a high nitrate source and a low nitrate source and combine them to dilute the level of nitrate that they're finding in some parts of the catchment. And the nitrate time bomb, that's not my phrase, that actually comes from somebody in the Environment Agency. And as Martin said earlier, our rivers are, of course, not rainfall, they're not spate rivers, the water comes from an underground aquifer. And it's quite remarkable how long the water can stay in the aquifer for. So as of now, about half of the river water flowing down the River Itchen has been in that aquifer for 50 years. There's probably a small percentage of it that actually fell as rainfall during the First World War. It can even be there for centuries. And what that means, of course, is that we don't know where the top of the curve is. We know that nitrate was applied artificial fertilizers in high quantities after the Second World War, the 50s, 60s, and the 70s. Some of that, of course, got washed off the fields. It got into the groundwater, and now it's starting, particularly in our aquifer-fed rivers, it's starting to emerge. And so that is a concern, I think, for all of us, even for the regulator. Moving on to phosphate. Again, this is the equivalent Environment Agency phosphate heat map with their official measurements. The same time period, and you can see back in the 70s and 80s, it was red. It was pretty bad, phosphate in our rivers, but now they mostly classify it as green, which is something that it doesn't quite fit with the observations that we're seeing on the river. Clear but not clean, as Martin would would put it, and we've seen those progressive declines in fly life and other forms of wildlife. So we look at this and we think, well, you know, is it really getting better? We know 20 years ago, some of the fish farms and watercress farms had their permits tightened, but has the problem really gone away? So in your yellow box, you'll have a nice helpful laminate like this, which is giving us broad brush ideas of what's high, good, and moderate using the Water Framework Directive. And I think, as you're probably all familiar with, the upper limit of phosphate, which I think is certainly in our rivers is the limiting factor. It's the nutrient that when there's too much of it triggers those algal blooms. But the upper limit for good is 0.3 PO4, and remember, if you're comparing with official Environment Agency measures, divide by 3, so it's 0.1 parts per million PO4 as P. And that, according to the Environment Agency, still supports good ecological status. And of course, that's a national average for all the rivers, all the river types, all the geologies in the country. And remember, it was partly based on on measurements of rivers. So it's partly based on what was or what is, rather than the ideal state. And despite the fact that apparently there's no problem with phosphates, we still have scenes like this whenever it gets hot and flow is low. And this isn't just about numbers as well. This does have real ecological consequences. Here's the blue-winged olive. It's one of my favourite mayflies. If you've seen the nymphs at the top right, there is the one with the one with the speckly legs. And the thing about the blue-winged olive is it spends longer in the egg than other species of mayfly, and it's vulnerable not just to phosphate but also to sediment. So, and this is a study that was done in the scientific journal, and they found that when there is sediment and there is phosphate gets locked up in the sediment that overlies the gravel. Then there was significant mortality in blue-winged olive eggs, one of the factors perhaps to depressing fly life compared to the past. And notice that they were looking at phosphate levels 0.07, so that's about 3/4 of that upper limit to WFD good of 0.1. So that's a good example, a direct example of how phosphate and also sediment is actually impacting a key species in our chalk streams. So if we don't think the WFD good is a proper measure, at least not for a chalk stream, what do we want instead? So the Itchen is, I think, probably fairly unique in that almost all of its length is designated as an SAC, a special area of conservation. There's a number of triple SIs along its length, sites of special scientific interest. And so these are areas of the river which have statutory protection. This may be of interest to folk who are not on the chalk stream. Where you have a stretch of the river that's designated, the Natural England will usually set a target for favourable condition, and those targets will cover phosphate, nitrate, ammonia, and possibly some other things like flow. And for our rivers, that's these are the phosphate targets that Natural England sets for the streams immediately around me. And you can see there, they're about a third of that WFD good limit. And we think that these are much more appropriate targets for a sensitive chalk stream which is naturally very, very poor in the nutrients. And so we then get to a graph like this. This is the site that I look after on the Candover. These are my phosphate readings downloaded from EpiCollect. And I've coded the bar chart. So blue will be WFD high. That's the best classification. Green will be WFD good, and yellow will be WFD moderate. And that the red line then is the Natural England target. Just to be clear, Natural England's number is actually a target. It's an advisory. It's not actually a potentially legal limit binding like the WFD is. And so we get to what Euler calls a good status illusion. So, okay, so on my site, I've had one spot, I've had several spikes, one which actually moved into the WFD moderate territory. The Environment Agency classifies this as WFD high. But actually, you can see about 50% of the readings I've got are actually worse than that Natural England target for a designated area more appropriate to a chalk stream. We've done this now for about 60 sites on the itch and the test and the Meon, to keep it simple, I've got a couple of color-coded columns. This one here on the left is sites which don't exceed a WFD good on average over the 2 years, and this column on the right are the ones that meet the Natural England target, that lower, more appropriate number. And you can see on the Itchen we sampled 21 sites. Only when we get down to the Stanford Meadows in Eastleigh and the urban area do we find a site which isn't meeting WFD good. When we look at the designated sites, we find that only 4 out of the 19 are actually meeting that Natural England target. Similar picture on the test. 31 out of 32 places that folks sample are meeting WFD good. But of the designated ones, a number of them are not actually designated on the test, but only 5 of the 19 designated sites are meeting their target. Similarly, on the Meon, only down towards the sea at Titchfield is it not meeting WFD good. But only 2 of those 7 sites are meeting their Natural England target. And so we've produced our report with evidence to support some of the things I've just talked about. We released that a couple of weeks ago, and it's gone to the regulator. It's gone to a number of people who we want to influence to try and make a difference. And really, I think what I've learned from this is that WFD has a number of flaws, a number of issues, and in particular, it really isn't appropriate to apply a national average to something like a chalk stream. And as I say, it is worth checking. If you're not on the chalk stream, you may well have triple SI or some designated protection on a part of your river. And if you do, then Natural England might well have set some more appropriate targets for nutrients. And it's worth inquiring, worth finding out what those might be. Might help you in some of your campaigning work. So that's the view from Hampshire chalk streams. Happy to take any questions. Martin, I know my colleague Martin Miles is on the call as well. So Martin, if you'd like to add anything.
Well, no, I think you've covered it pretty well there, Ian. As I said before, I think with the chalk streams have a distinctive profile compared to A river like White's Raven, which I also know very well. So the young lad was born up in Coventry, so I've fished the White's Raven, the Hampshire Raven, and the Test Ditching many times, and can certainly tell the difference between them all.
Smashing. Yes, it's a shame Adam from the Hampshire Avon can't be here, but he has a similar in Natural England has set a target of 0.05 on his river, which again is of course half of that WFD limit, and I think there's some interesting things going on the Hampshire Avon. So maybe we'll hear from Adam in a future call.
Yeah, we couldn't quite get the diaries to line up for everyone, but yeah, they've been doing similar work over there as well, and I think like you say, it is definitely worthwhile checking whether you've got triple SI or SAC status to see if there's any work Natural England's been doing, like Ian says, because like you say, it can change the picture quite dramatically in the case of Test and Itchin and Hampshire Open, where they've done that work, rather than that false picture of everything being fine when it's just clearly not. And yeah, that's the reason Natural England's part of the advice. So have we got any final questions, or should we wrap up a whopping 9 minutes early? Sounds like that. Just to say, so I am away next week. I say away. I'm off work. But so if there's any questions or anything that come up, if it's not urgent, then I'll be back at my desk sort of the week after that, whatever date that is. If anything comes up, then send emails to the aap@anglingtrust.net address, and that'll be monitored. So any questions and anything there, then yeah, check it on there. Also, if you've got any feedback on whether it's sort of the structure of how we do the webinars or anything you'd like to cover, anything at all, then give us a shout and we can arrange that for the next one, because it's always nice to hear what everyone's been up to. So yeah, well, thanks a lot everyone for spending your Thursday evening listening to a whole load of data analysis. I know that's everyone's dream Thursday night. So yeah, thanks for your time, everyone. And then we'll catch you. We'll see some of you tomorrow. And thanks Ed as well for joining us. And yeah, just to flag again, if you want to get your hands dirty, but get in the river and do any more sort of actual restoration work and figuring stuff out, because Ed's knowledge and the rest of his team is really brilliant with Wild Trout Trust. So yeah, that's another one to be aware of. But yeah, if there's anything else, then I think we'll call it a night there. So yeah, thanks everyone for joining.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Right, well, there we go. Thanks, Ian.
All right, you're welcome.
Putting that together. All right, I'll catch you again soon.
Have a good holiday.
All right, yeah, thanks, Ian. All right, catch you soon, mate.